Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pierce. This is a Ukraine War Update Extra video where I give you the extra nuggets to get your teeth into to give you an understanding of the war, greater appreciation of what goes on and why. Sometimes I wonder whether I'm just completely sad, getting obsessed and really interested in all the sorts of things I'm going to be talking about, and then think, well, there must be an appetite for this because you're here watching it. Maybe we're all sad together, or maybe we're all cool together. Who knows? But I just find all this stuff absolutely fascinating. So I've actually decided to do two videos today. This is the first half of the video because there was so much content. I always say this, but loads of really great stuff to talk about. Really fascinating, in my humble opinion. So please excuse the fact that this has been split into two. There are quite a few long threads I'm going to read through. First one is I'm going to return to casualty figures. And this is a thread by Trent Telenko a couple of days ago. I meant to talk about this the other day when I was discussing how I calculate, or don't actually, casualty figures. I don't really lump for actual numbers because I think it's virtually impossible to know. But my idea is to look at figures and see an indicative nature of those figures on a daily basis rather than the actual numbers, see more or less than the day before, more or less than average, and have some kind of understanding that I think Ukraine are losing fewer troops than Russia. And here is I've already given you all the evidence why I think that, but I think it's pretty clear that the ratio is going to be in favor of Ukraine here. Anyway, what happened the other day is it got leaked out from Ramstein. There are Western sources saying that actually we previously thought there's 100,000 dead and wounded, and that was only sort of 14 days ago or something, 13 days ago. Sorry, 13, as it says here. And then Ramstein has said, actually, no, we think it's 188,000. So what explains that jump in 88,000 in just 13 days? And it's going to be a case of them trying to get more accurate with the way they are evaluating the casualty numbers. So Trent Telenko talks about that. Says, I don't know whether to cheer, scream, or take a victory lap seeing these new casualty numbers, because he's been saying that the casualties have been high and that the US and Ukrainian figures haven't quite reflected that. US national intelligence went from 100,000 to 188,000 casualties in the 13 days between the 8th of January or to the 21st of January 2023. And he talks about that Sun newspaper report that reported that number from Ramstein, which I talked to you about previously. So he says, this increase represents a fundamental change in the US national intelligence methodology that calculates Russian casualties. I have previously called US intelligence out on how bad their 100,000 AFU and Russia casualty estimates were. So back on January 8th, he had a thread on that. The scale of the change, 88,000, is consistent with going back and calculating Russian cold weather and other non-battle casualties to the beginning of the Russia-Ukrainian war via reviewing old SIGINT intercepts plus systematically gathering Belarusian and Russian hospital data. So there's a case of using other sources to try and develop a more accurate appraisal of the casualty numbers. So where OSINT is open source intelligence, SIGINT is signals intelligence. So that's basically intercepts, phone calls, radios, all those kind of things. Mainstream media, he says, reporters ought to be asking the Pentagon why that 88,000 Russian casualties change happened in 13 days. Plus, if these calculations now include both Russian battle and cold weather non-battle casualties, cold weather is not just cold weather, but that is one of the main ones. A third question needs to be asked of the Pentagon is, what casualty ratio do they use? That is, ask how many wounded per every Russian killed. So I've been talking about 3-1 as a general rule of thumb, but again, how accurate is that? So that's to say, if you had 10,000 soldiers dying, you would have another 30,000 wounded. So that is a ratio 3-1. And it's useful to understand the difference between proportion and ratio there. So it's 3-1, but it's actually 1/4. So you have 40,000 in total, of which 10,000. So sorry, really basic maths here, but just in case you're not up on that or whatever, you have 10,000 out of 40,000, which is 1 out of 4, which is a quarter. That's 25%. But it's actually a 3-1 ratio, or 1-3 ratio there. So 10,000 out of 40,000, you have 10,000 dead, 30,000 wounded. That's you get the total by adding both sides of the ratio up. So the total is 4 or 40,000 or whatever, and then you can work out your percentages. Anyway, sorry about that. That is how many wounded per every Russian killed. The videos of poor Russian medevac versus the Ukrainians near US Army levels of medical evacuation and care would also be a useful series of questions to get a feel for the 88,000 Russian casualty increase in 13 days. This is great because this is exactly what I've been saying. One of the conclusions that's been made in intelligence analysis has been that the Russians have, if you take their whole so say you got 100,000 dead and wounded on each side, right? Just I'm making that up. That's just 100,000, nice easy number. And it might be that Ukrainians have 25,000 dead out of that and 75,000 wounded. That's a 1-to-3 ratio. The Russians might have like 40,000 dead and 60,000 wounded. So actually, you've got a 4-to-6, which is a 2-to-3 ratio. So actually, it's much closer to parity because it turns out, so people are saying, that the medical care for the Russians in that golden hour, so the hour after you've been wounded and you really need medical treatment, which is really important to survival, is very bad. And so Russians are either getting left on the battlefield or they're not getting to decent medical support quickly enough. And as a result, those people end up dying. So the ratio of wounded to dead is far different for the Russians, so people are saying, than for the Ukrainians. So when you have these just casualty numbers, you say 100,000 casualties for the Ukrainians, 100,000 casualties for the Russians, actually that represents a very different killed in action number for both, arguably. The question is, so some people might say, well, actually, it's better, like scare quotes for those listening, it's better to have dead than wounded because the wounded require an awful lot more personnel to look after them, and also an awful lot more resource to look after them. You've got to get them off the battlefield, which takes maybe 2 people out for every 1 person injured to get those people away, and so on and so forth. And actually, if they're just dead, then that's that. And you can carry on doing everything. So actually, it's almost more, if your troops are expendable in the way that the Russians appear to be, then it might actually be more advantageous to have them outright killed rather than wounded, and so on and so forth. Anyway, that's highly controversial, of course, but that's the thinking of some people. The issues related to what is a Russian casualty ratio are fundamental to the policy choices in this war. Again, see this earlier tweet of mine, where he said Armed Force Ukraine is using a 1 Russian KIA to 2 WIA casualty ratio. So that's 1 Russian killed in action to 2 wounded in action. In other words, if you had 100,000 casualties, that in total, that would be 33,000 dead and 66,000 thereabouts wounded. So that's a 1-to-2 ratio rather than 25,000 dead and 75,000 wounded that you might have on a 3-to-1 ratio. So that's again exactly what I was saying just then before. The Ukrainian GUR military intelligence has surfaced a 1 Russian KIA to 1.3 wounded since Mobix showed up in late September. Holy cow. Now, that could well be propaganda. But if that's the case, you've almost got a 1-to-1 killed to wounded ratio. That is absolutely terrible. I've been using, this is Trent Telenko, I've been using 1 KIA to 2 WIA since late March 2022 based on Russian leaks. So he's been arguing that the figures have been way worse than some of the intelligence services have been letting on or calculating. So he continues this thread. That US national intelligence was so wrong on Russian casualties, they had to plus up 88,000 in 13 days is bad. But the adjustment says they are trying. The problem is it's still far too low, and it seems to be using an outdated 1 KIA to 4 WIA ratio for Russian casualties. I've gone in depth on this weakness in US national intelligence Russian casualty assessment methodology for literally months. See my summary thread of casualty threads back in November. So, I mean, I could delve into that, but you get the point. He thinks the number is much higher and the ratio is much more in favor of killed in action rather than wounded than for the Ukrainians. The bottom line up front is that the most accurate ongoing count of Russian casualties has to be calculated from the Ukrainian liquidated Russian personnel number. So he was really putting a lot of store in that number that I give you every day, saying that actually that is the most accurate. The 18th of January 2023, and I would say it probably is. if that is not just dead. So we've been having this discussion, haven't we, recently, about whether liquidated personnel is actually a bit of a mistranslation of the word. Well, they use the same kind of word for liquidated, but actually for them, they don't mean it as completely taken out, like in the sense that we use the word liquidated. So it's a bit of a problematic word for them to use, and some people are arguing it means completely dead. BBC and others are saying actually no, it represents KIA and WI, wounded in action, who are like unable to go back to the front lines anytime soon. And he's saying that is definitely the most accurate out there, which is, it's the largest figure out there. The 18th of January 2023, Ukrainian Ministry of Defense number was 117,770 Russian dead. Again, that discussion about dead, was it dead or is it liquidated, and what does liquidated mean? Total Russian casualties would be dead plus wounded plus non-battle casualties like cold injuries like trench foot or frostbite. I've multiplied Ukrainian killed in action figures by 1.5 to get the wounded 176,655 for the 18th of January 2023. Again, that's a fairly arbitrary number, but he's taking into account lots of different sources, as he talked about before. 117,770 Russians dead plus 176,655 wounded is 294,425 Russian battle casualties. Of course, some of those will have gone back to the front line, because that's from the beginning of the war. Non-battle casualties would be, in addition to that 294,425 battle casualty number. The US casualty numbers for Russia are still 114,425, low with their new methodology. So he's saying that even at 188,000, Trentelenko says that number is way too low. Bad, but trying, certainly beats what we were seeing from the German BND. So this is German intelligence, and this is from January the 20th. Germany's Foreign Intelligence Service is alarmed by the losses of the Ukrainian army in Bakhmut. The Ukrainian army is losing a 3-digit number of soldiers every day. That's in Bakhmut. I reported that myself in Der Spiegel. Germany's Federal Intelligence Service told lawmakers this week. And he's obviously, well, he goes on to say, Trentelenko, German BND briefed the Bundestag committees 2 days ago and claimed the AFU were taking 3-digit combat losses daily in Bakhmut alone. 100 to 300 AFU casualties a day across the whole front is reasonable, normal wastage. At Bakhmut alone, I call that BS. I don't know. Bakhmut has been difficult. Some of those most difficult days where Klishchivka was getting done or Solidar was being lost, and I don't know, is that a realistic number? Trentelenko saying no, and saying 3-figure AFU casualties a day. Remember our biases. We want that to be true. We're pro-Ukrainian. That Trentelenko is correct. We want him to be right that that's BS, and that the Russian figures are much higher, and so on and so forth. So be aware of your own wishful thinking fallacy there, which is, I want this to be true, therefore I put, and the confirmation bias, therefore I put more value in the claim that confirms my own opinions or desires. After saying 3-figure AFU casualties a day without casualty ratio context is manipulative alarmism. So alarmed by the losses of the Ukrainian army. The Ukrainian army is losing. What does losing mean? Does that mean dead or wounded or both? Sorry, that's me going off on one there. So he continues, casualty ratios matter, and Ukraine has a 1 to 10 KIA to WIA ratio for reasons I laid out in a tweet thread I'm referencing here. So he thinks it's hugely in favor of the wounded for his take on those casualty numbers. I might pop and have a look at that thread in a second. So modern Western body armor makes a huge difference in death and wound rates for AFU troops in Bakhmut's deep entrenchments and field fortifications. This Ukrainian soldier lived, and I showed you that picture previously, and it just shows you the quality of body armor on at least some of the Ukrainian soldiers, and it appears that they have better equipment than the Russians. Germans, he continues, intelligence being fed disinformation by the Russians is decades old, and BND has a recent history of blundering. If not, BND is lying, as it looks like total fiction, and he shows a link there to support that claim, likely fabricated to embarrass Zelensky at the Ramstein meeting. It took Pearl Harbor and 6 months of defeat to get US military intelligence good enough to help make the victory at Midway happen. US intelligence spotted the impending Russian invasion in February 2022, but found to its horror that it completely misread both Russia's and Ukraine's relative strengths, and things kept getting worse, having their collective faces rubbed in the fact that both they and three previous generations of US intelligence missed the fact that Russia's military didn't use mechanized logistics, will go in the history books under the chapter heading of the top 5 intelligence failures in world history. It will be the work of decades to dig out from all the bad assumptions now built into US defense policy from that one. US intelligence is now they are learning where those bad assumptions live, as shown in the 88,000 Russian casualty increase between the 8th and 21st of January. Their casualty models are unrealistic in large part because of their mirror imaging of the US mechanized medevac. In other words, he's saying that the US are projecting their own medevac experience and their own experience in war to generate KIA to WIA ratios. But he said, but Trent Tulenko is saying, well, actually, that might not be relevant for both the Russian and the Ukrainian forces here. They aren't the American forces. So he's saying that, in large part because their mirror imaging of the US mechanized medevac logistics on the Russians. Unlearning all the bad assumptions, investing in US military intelligence after 80 years will in turn be the work of a generation. Getting Russian casualties right is the first place to start. As for the German BND, they are giving Chancellor Scholz exactly the intelligence that he wants to hear. That is going to be a major national security problem for future German governments. So that is a pretty interesting and damning thread in terms of both US intelligence and particularly German intelligence there. And he has wildly different numbers to a lot of other sources, but he's got some receipts to back it up. Talking about this is again another huge thread here. This is how he gets the 1 to 10 death to wounded. So this translated Ukrainian video from War Translated makes this kind of clear, his claim. So first, Ukrainian troopers are trained as lifesavers. Check off the platinum 5 minutes. So that you get the golden hour, which is we can get this guy to medical facilities within an hour, and they've got blood and this and that, then this guy's got a much greater chance of surviving. If it's outside the hour, it's looking like game over. But there's also the platinum 5 minutes. If we can get some really good assistance to him straight away to stop some of the worst stuff happening, then actually that's really important. And they've got Ukrainian troopers are trained as lifesavers, whereas that's not necessarily the case, particularly for mobilized troops of the Russians. Second, Ukraine evacuates wounded within 1 hour. Check off the golden hour. And again, he's sort of referring to sources for that. The Ukrainian medic doctor in this video is talking about company level medical aid stations and evacuation points. US NATO medical standards only have those at battalion level. Given that, so what he's saying here is that it is arguably Ukraine are doing a better job than the Americans might do. Given the relative lack of helicopter medevac inside Ukraine due to long-range Russian SAMs, this additional medical aid at low levels is the only reasonable way Ukraine can be achieving Americans in 2010 and later Iraq casualty ratios 1 to 7 or 1 to 10 KIA to WIA. Companies make up battalions. So for the UK, I think companies about 100 to 150 soldiers, maybe more for the Americans. So battalion might be like, I don't know, well, up to 1,000 soldiers, might be three to 5 companies. So there or thereabouts. But the Ukrainians have got these kind of medical organizational features at company level rather than just at battalion level. So Ukraine has more manpower than heavy weapons. So putting a larger than NATO standard percentage of that manpower with civilian SUVs into battlefield medical care and evacuation of those who are armed with heavy weapons is a very smart manpower choice. Russian Mobics are meat for the Ukrainian sausage grinder. The Ukrainian soldiers are valuable citizen soldiers whom the Ukrainian state cares deeply for and will do its utmost to see to it that they survive. This is absolutely true. So there's just a greater value put on human life for the Ukrainians. They're fighting for their homeland. This is all about, the point we're doing this is for you. And if you are fighting for us, then, you are the reason we're doing this. And therefore you are of this like intrinsic value. Whereas for the Russians, it's like these are expendable humans. They have extrinsic value because they're a means to an end. So if they die and we get a few extra meters, then well, that's fine, because we don't really give much of intrinsic value, especially if they're convicts and Wagner, so on and so forth. So there's a really different cultural approach to human life, I guess, between the two forces. He continues, Trent Telenko. It's also why Ukrainians have literally bulletproof Western helmets and body armor with ceramic inserts plus adequate combat engineering. So we have seen video footage of, and I've seen this, and I've shown you in months ago, actually, in videos where the Russians have been amazed at the quality of the body armor the Ukrainians have used, right? And they've done actually firing shots at them on range. A couple of Cadavervites were doing this once, and it was not going through. And they're like, how is this? And I've seen other videos of Russians who have made homemade ones out of bits of metal and stuff that have been useless. And I've seen them sort of taking a mickey out of their own ones. I've seen people who have died, even though they've got this stuff. There is a very clear difference between the level and the quality of the body armor that the two forces are using and have access to. You've got Western nations where you get all the headline stuff like, oh, they're given this many tanks, this many SPGs. What you don't often hear is, yeah, and they're getting like 10,000 bits of body armor. Germany were taking a mickey out of 5,000 helmets, but it's stuff like that is still useful, right? It's still really important that the Ukrainians get this stuff on a very human, very localized level. Anyway, Trent continues. And despite all of that, the medic and doctor translated from in that video stated Ukraine was taking frostbite casualties. How much of that 5% a day Mobic casualty rate are cold injuries like trench foot and frostbite? I've posted on that. And since then, retweeting this translation of other Mobics complaining about having no winter boots. And we've seen video footage of captured Russian soldiers wearing women's boots that they've nicked out of houses because they don't have quality kit that they've been given, so they have to nick stuff off. We've seen Ukrainian soldiers that have been killed in Solidar, and every single one of them was stripped of boots. Why is that? Because the Russian soldiers do not have quality boots of their own. As he continues, while others have reposted a special curse on cat video of a catcher. Yeah, here's the one. Here is the guy wearing, that's the one wearing sort of women's boots. It's like, why have you got them? Anyway, let's be clear. For every Ukrainian trench foot or frostbite cold injury, Mobics are taking at least 10. It's the difference between Ukrainian citizen soldiers and waves of Russian Myazo, aka meat cannon fodder. So, interesting. I think Trent Telenko gives a really strong case here, and actually, I joined that thread halfway through. So he talks a lot about attrition rates of mobilized soldiers. He looks at lots of other information, as you can see there. But I think Trent Telenko builds a really good case for there being significant differences in both the killed in action and wounded in action on both sides. Right, moving on, because that was a long one. Goodness me. So I was asked today in my update video, in my frontline update video, Jonathan, a month ago there was significant discussion over JDAMs. Nothing since. Have you seen evidence of this weapon's employment? I recognise the risk of loss of Ukrainian fighter aircraft, thus limiting immediate JDAMs. So JDAMs are these adapted bombs that you can give some kind of guidance to, or some kind of greater range by instead of just being your basic dumb bomb, you can put fins and stuff on them, so they can as the plane is traveling at speed, you drop it. It uses kind of the speed that the plane is going at, the height the plane is going at, to be able to get a greater range for that otherwise dumb bomb. Anyway, that's a brief description. So I recognise the risk of loss to Ukrainian fighter aircraft, thus limiting immediate JDAMs use. But do the Ukrainians have UAVs large enough to carry these heavy weapons? The thing with UAVs is they're slower moving and can be hit more easily than fixed wings, I guess. But I haven't heard of the drones being equipped with JDAMs, and I don't know that they'll be traveling fast enough to be able to get the range that JDAMs have, because you need to be going a much faster speed than drones, because they're not necessarily like fully, they're not self-propelled, they're not rockets or anything. They are bombs effectively. So let's look at timing on this. This is from Air and Space Forces magazine. US publication says the US previously said it will provide 4,000 Zuni rockets. Oh, that's interesting. What are Zuni rockets? Let's have just a little sidebar here. The latest package also includes, this is another Air and Space Forces magazine entry. The latest package also includes new air capabilities. In a bid to bolster Ukraine's air force, the US will send 4,000 Zuni rockets, which can be fired at ground targets. The US also recently announced it was sending Joint Direct Attack Munitions, JDAMs, to Ukraine. Previously, the Pentagon had focused on sending HARM anti-radiation missiles, which could attack Russian surface-to-air missile sites. However, the Zuni and the JDAMs give Ukraine's air force a new strike capability. Quote, in terms of providing Ukraine with capability for their aircraft, it's actually something we've been working on for a while, Laura Cooper, Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Russia, Ukraine and Eurasia, said in a briefing at the Pentagon. This is really just the latest in efforts to help them to make their existing aircraft fleet as effective as possible, end quote. Cooper said the Zuni rockets could be mounted on fixed wing or rotary wing aircraft. Quote, it's air to ground, but it's fairly close range, she said. The Zuni rockets have laser guided and unguided versions, and it's not immediately clear which type the US was providing. When asked how Ukraine would employ rockets designed for American aircraft onto aircraft designed in the Soviet Union, Cooper cracked a wry smile. Quote, I trust our engineers, and I definitely trust the Ukrainian engineers, she said, and quote, it is something that is possible. In the latest effort to help meet Ukraine's air defense needs, the US will provide RIM-7 Sea Sparrow missiles that will be modified for the use of Ukrainian buck launchers. So the idea is that actually they've been adapting like HARM missiles to fire off Soviet aircraft. They've adapted these Sea Sparrow missiles. So it shouldn't be a problem adapting. They're pretty innovative, adapting these JDAMs and Zuni missiles to Ukrainian fixed-wing aircraft and rotary aircraft. So to go back to the first article, so that's just what Zuni rockets are, surface-to-ground, air-to-ground rockets. So they will... the US previously said it will provide 4,000 Zuni rockets and an unspecified amount of JDAMs guided bombs in the past month. The US has been providing anti-radiation missiles for months, so the HARM ones, and it's adding an unspecified amount of high-speed anti-radiation missiles in the latest package, though those munitions are intended to attack surface-to-air sites, while the Zunis and JDAMs offer a strike capability. Zuni rockets come in guided and unguided variants, though the Pentagon declined to say which type yet, as we said before. Citing operational security, systems are not on the table at the meeting are fixed-wing aircraft and long-range ATACMS missiles. Okay. Just to add to that, I've also found the US Department of Defense release on their latest contracts. And this, or at least I don't know exactly when this was written. This was January 20th. Yeah. So this is really recent, 3 days ago. And they said the Boeing company doing business as Boeing Defense Space and Security in St. Louis, Missouri, has been awarded a $40.514815 million fixed-term price undefinitized contract action for Joint Direct Attack Munition JDAM wing kits. Work will be performed in St. Louis, Missouri, and is expected to be completed by June the 30th, 2023. In other words, yeah, they won't be on. I presume this is for the bombs, for the kits rather than wing kit, rather than like stuff to attach them to wings. Like these will be the JDAM kits, and I guess that they are making them now. And you know, it is what, January the 23rd. They're not going to be on Ukrainian planes by January the 27th, right? This is an ongoing contract that will be completed by June. So I presume there'll be JDAMs going in successive, once they've been built in successive packages up till June. Don't know when the first ones will be, and then they'll have to be attached to the Ukrainian fighters or multi-role fighters or whatever for them to use them. Anyway, hopefully that was of use. I don't know. Will I have time to do some of these big other threads? We shall see. Let's go to Timothy Garton-Ash, who's a British historian. He's talking about the Leopards debacle concerning Germany and their reticence to provide Leopards, even though they appear to be all right with that now, certainly with export from other countries. So he says, as a long-time admirer of democratic Germany, I've been deeply depressed and dismayed this week by Chancellor Scholz's refusal to allow German Leopard 2 tanks to be sent to Ukraine. Long, bitty Twitter thread here, but full post elsewhere. So here are just a few ways in which Scholz's policies weak, contradictory, inconsistent, historically insensitive, morally problematic, disingenuous, and counterproductive. But apart from that, absolutely fine. Ukraine, so he's going to have a right go here, but also he recognises that Germany had done a heck of a lot recently, and therefore they're undoing all their good work with this. But anyway, Ukraine needs modern battle tanks for the combined arms counteroffensive, essential to recover more Russian occupied territory before Putin's 200,000 plus mobilized Russian reserves get there to defend it and attack again. Time is therefore of the essence. German foot dragging could mean that Russia ends up hanging on to more of that territory and therefore being able to claim a partial victory in any resulting de facto, if not de jure, peace settlement. There is good reason to believe that some German policymakers, as always, giving strategic priority to the long-term relationship with Russia, privately reckon that this would be an outcome we should settle for. That is the truth that dares not speak its name. So there's a lot of pro-Russian sentiment within German politics. He continues, if so, they are profoundly mistaken. It would reinforce Putin's power and show Xi Jinping, as he eyes Taiwan, that you can simply seize other people's territory by force. This is what Germany, as a leading advocate of rules-based international order, has spent decades opposing. Of course, one has to be mindful of the danger of escalation, but the way Scholz and some other social democrats talk about the danger of Russian nuclear use recalls the 1980s rhetoric of their younger years, when the threat of all-out nuclear war trumped everything else. In the name of Freuden, a very specific ideological version of peace, Eastern Europeans had to shut up and keep their heads down. Freuden may not be everything, but without Freuden, everything is nothing. And that's a quote from Egon Bahr. Whether or not this is a genuine fear of nuclear war. So there's the idea that nuclear war the threat of nuclear war kept everyone just not doing things, and et cetera, et cetera. Whether or not this is a genuine fear of nuclear war on their part, it is not a realistic assessment of the risk. If Putin used a tactical or nuclear weapon, it would kill Ukrainians, not Germans. German angst also contrasts painfully with Ukrainian courage. Scholz constantly emphasizes the need for, quote, European sovereignty, but when it comes to weapons support for Ukraine, his position is, we don't do anything unless the Americans do it. Some contradiction, surely. German government officials tell you privately, but you see, the Americans aren't sending tanks. But when one talks to the Americans, they say, we're not stopping them. The argument that Germany won't send Leopards unless US sends Abrams tanks is not militarily serious. The hugely complicated jet fuel propelled lumbering Abrams are ill suited to Ukraine's needs. Some Americans will probably disagree with that. The just less than 2,000 Leopard 2s in the armories of 13 European armies are well suited. The new German defense minister said after Ramstein meeting that they had to review their stocks of Leopard 2 tanks to see how they might be potentially available to Ukraine. After 11 months of full-scale war in Ukraine, it seemed beyond careless not to have done this already. Just 2 days later, it turns out it was either ill-informed or disingenuous, since Der Spiegel has seen a secret Bundeswehr document prepared already in early summer 2022, which identified 19 Leopard 2 tanks in their armory that would be suitable for use by Ukraine. In practice, more suitable might be some currently held for refurbishment by Germany's formidable defense industry. There's a painful contrast between the speed and organizational skill of Germany's energy adaptation and implausible excuses and bureaucratic foot dragging on this. Some friends say one should not place too much emphasis on the arguments from history. I can only say that as someone who has long admired Germany's exemplary facing up to and trying to learn lessons from its double difficult past, Nazi and Stasi, it feels important to me. As I can safely say, it does to quite a few other Europeans, not least in Central and Eastern Europe. Maybe so. Someone else suggests Scholz is in line with German public opinion. And I would agree with that actually myself. So this is me commenting. As I showed you, 43% of Germans still do not want Leopard 2s to be sent to Ukraine. So there's a significant German opinion proportion of their population that is not really happy with Leopard 2s being given, but a very vocal majority and vocal people around Europe are very much in favour. But there you go. So, but the duty of German Chancellor in a critical moment for Europe is to lead, not to follow. I was talking about this. What does a politician do? Do they follow their constituents, or do they lead them? And he sort of goes into a few historical examples of leading rather than following. A lot of this has to do with managing a divided social democratic party with a strong anti-military and pro-Russian wing. The Greens and Free Democrats have both been much better on this issue, as have the opposition Christian Democrats. The German government keeps pointing out that there that it's one of the largest military supporters of Ukraine, as well as giving a very substantial financial and humanitarian contribution. This is absolutely true. Germany has moved a huge distance from its position before 24th of February 2022. So why cancel out all the international credit you should be getting for all of that by foot dragging on this? So that's a really good point. Like, yes, we should be singing the praises of Germany, and we have been. I have been. But you can undo all of that with just this little thing about leopards. And that's just ruined it. Now everyone's like, oh, Germany. Well, actually, Germany is the second biggest contributor in real terms to Ukraine militarily in the world after America. So, especially since you're going to move in the end. And the idea is that, well, eventually everyone's going to convince you, and you will end up doing that, but at the pain of losing all that credibility and credit. The entire German record since February last year on almost every category of weaponry has been, quote, we're not going to send that, we're not going to send that, uh, e.g. Gepards and Marders, until finally, oh, yes, we are. And then, why do you criticize us? Look, we've sent that. I will take a bet it will be the same with the Leopards. Come on, Germany, you are better than this. It's a pretty harsh, but I guess quite fair appraisal of the whole Leopards situation there, which is, don't ruin all the good work you've done by that. Thank you. So that's the end of the first part. Appreciate you checking this out. Please like, subscribe, and share. All the ways you can help the channel are in the description below. Really appreciate that. And check out my extra video, my second one, a little bit later. In the meantime, see you.